So let me introduce the meetup. So we are actually from Colombo JavaScript meetup, and we are hosting our May edition this time due to the pandemic situation as online meetup. So we actually have our regular speaker who actually have done few sessions with us previously. He's Rajika. Rajik is actually an open source enthusiast who is actually contributing to multiple open source projects, and even he's actually mentoring as a mentor joined for GSOC. So Rajika works for 99x Technology, and he's going to talk about new generation of the JavaScript from the set. So I am going to hand over the session to Rajika to continue.
Yeah, Chatu, thanks for the introduction, and I hope you guys can me hear properly. Chatu, can you confirm this?
Yeah, I'm here properly, and I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, great. All right, so we will look at a new a UI library called Svelte, and let's see how this is different from what we have right now, and what are the differences, and why we should be looking into this new concept. All right, so I think Chatu gave an introduction about myself. If you have any questions, and if you miss anything in this session and you want to ask it, you can ask any questions with this. You can find me anywhere with this handle, Rajagrima. Yeah, so let's go through a few of the generations of JavaScript applications we have developed from different eras. So first we started with vanilla JavaScript, and in this era we did not have complicated libraries such as Jquery, and we did not use much of the third-party libraries, and there was no package manager such as npm or yarn, and we just used vanilla JavaScript to develop static or simple websites to be exact. And this is how it might have looked like before we had all these complications like package managers, bundlers, and compilers with the JavaScript ecosystem. And this is a very simple example of mutating the DOM. Yeah. And then we moved into the Jquery era. Even though this is just a library or a utility that we use in JavaScript, this played a huge role in that era after we used vanilla JavaScript, and then we moved into this Jquery era, because Jquery gave us the tools and all the necessary things that we needed to manipulate DOM pretty easily, and this was a huge deal back then. This is the same example that we saw earlier, and this is using Jquery. I'm quite sure that most of you are familiar with all these simple examples, but just for the sake of refreshing how we came to use these libraries and these complex frameworks that we use right now, we will just look into these simple examples. And after that, we moved into the single page applications era, and here the idea was to have sort of an application shell and load different components into the application at runtime, so that the performance and the user experience is much better compared to just vanilla server-side rendering we had prior to single page application era. So this is an example of a single page application. This is Twitter, and I think they are also using React. React is a UI library. I'm quite sure that all of you must have heard about React. I don't need to do an introduction of that. Yeah, so this is a simple example, and this is quite performant compared to what we had earlier prior to the single page application era. And yeah, so there are different, and with single page applications, we had to implement different concepts in different manner. For an example, data fetching. How do we handle stale data? So likewise, there were so many concepts and issues that we faced when we moved into the single page applications era. And with single page applications, we have different number of options that we can use. So at the early stage, we got AngularJS from Google, and after that, we saw that Facebook came up with React. It was like a radical change in the UI library space, in web UI space, and many of the concepts brought from React.js, many of the concepts and the aspects brought in from React.js, they inspired other libraries and frameworks that we see today, even Angular. So AngularJS revolved into Angular, and also we got Vue.js, which is also a fantastic framework, a fantastic UI framework. And after we moved into this single-paged application era, we saw a few different issues or some problems that we needed to solve. So the first thing is overhead of the library or the framework itself as a dependency, and we need to include the library or framework as a dependency, and also in the runtime there's an overhead with this compared to vanilla JavaScript that we used to use prior to jQuery and single page applications. And we saw that we needed to solve this bundle size issue, because with the libraries and frameworks we moved into the concept of creating bundles. And with bundles, we got into the problem of having larger bundle sizes, and this is actually a huge problem even today when we are implementing applications with UI libraries or frameworks. And native reactivity, we can look into this when we move into the Svelte part. What's reactivity and how it's solved in Svelte. And with the React, they introduced something called the virtual DOM, or VDOM as we call it today. And this adds some sort of runtime complexity. So this is actually questionable when it comes to different contexts, but altogether we can say that it may add some sort of a runtime complexity with virtual DOM. Yeah. And with Angular, they have some sort of a compilation process happening behind the scene. And the two types are JIT, just in runtime, and ahead of time compilation. So with JIT, there's an additional overhead of interpreting or compiling this templates in Angular at runtime, and this adds a huge overhead to the performance. And from Angular 9, I think the default compilation option is ahead of time compilation, which is at the build time they are compiling all the templates and doing all the optimizations at build time. And compared to just in time compilation, which just takes this template to the browser as a string, and it does the compilation it does the compilation at runtime, and this adds a huge overhead. Yeah, so I think from Angular 9 onwards, their default is ahead of time compilation, but at build time, of course, they're using JIT, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. All right, let's quickly recap what we discussed so far. we looked into different eras of developing applications with JavaScript. So the first one was vanilla JavaScript, of course, and jQuery was jQuery revolutionized how we saw DOM manipulation, and we moved into single page applications with different libraries and frameworks. The reason why I call libraries and frameworks is that most people confuse React as a framework, but React is actually a UI library. But now it has some APIs like the context API and different stuff. Yeah, so that's kind of debatable right now. And when we call frameworks, Angular falls into this category, and also Vue. Yeah, so from the start, we saw different libraries and frameworks coming up with single page application like Backbone, Ember, and even Meteor with templating system like Blazor, if I'm not wrong. And Angular after that, AngularJS rolled into Angular, and then we got React and Vue. Yeah, so yet another UI library or a UI framework that's again kind of debatable with the APIs that we have with Svelte. So what's Svelte? Svelte is just a compiler. So this is also an open source project, and this is maintained by a person named Richard Harris, and he's working at New York Times. And I think he created this Svelte library just to make his needs for his work. And yeah, so this is not a framework, so that's out of the way, and it's a simple compiler, and we will see why we call it as a compiler rather than a framework. And no runtime dependencies, so this is quite important. If you think about something like React or Angular, we have runtime dependencies. So if you move into the context of React, we need to have React if you don't have any bundlers, or if you don't have any bundlers in the context, we have to have react.min.js directly in the directly attached to the HTML, and we need to use that runtime. And we have several other dependencies as well. I think React DOM is a dependency. So likewise, we have different dependencies when we use other libraries or frameworks, but in Svelte, there's no concept of runtime dependencies. And this is how the package.json in Svelte looks like. We have the familiar key value pairs. So if you look at dependencies, it's just a CLI. So I think this can also be moved into dev dependencies if I'm not wrong. But we can focus on dev dependencies. So we have a few dev dependencies, and one of them is Svelte itself. And this is using Rollup, and the default bundler, or the bundler for Svelte is Rollup, which is also created by Rich. And we can use Webpack, and that's also an option if that's what you like or what you need to go ahead with. Yeah. And Svelte brings reactive programming into the table. And if we take at the definition of reactive programming, so this is from Wikipedia. Reactive programming is a declarative programming paradigm concerned with data streams and the propagation of change. And if we take a very simple example, like A equals to B plus C, and if you consider something a language which does not implement this reactive programming concepts, if we assign this B plus C to A, and if we change something with the values of B and C, we need to do it again. But with Svelte, it's not the case. It will be changed automatically. So it implements the concept of reactive programming. Yeah, so before looking at the basics, I just want to highlight what we discussed earlier, because that's the important thing when it comes to looking at a new framework or a library. And in this case, this is just a compiler for UI. And the most important thing is to is going behind the scenes rather than just looking at the abstractions that they give us for developers. Of course, the abstractions are very important because that improves the developer experience. But we need to identify and understand what's actually happening behind the scenes. So if somebody missed the point, Svelte is just a compiler, and we add it as a dev dependency for our JavaScript projects, so that all the optimizations and the bundling that we do can be done at the build time, rather than having a runtime complexity compared to what we have today, what we had, and yeah. So let's look at some of the basics with Svelte. Let's quickly walk through with the basics. This is very similar to other libraries and frameworks like React and Angular. Svelte is also component based, and if you have used Vue, you will see a very similar templating mechanism. And the file extension is .svelte, and this is the root of an application, and we have app.svelte. So this is the app. And here we have, so this is a Svelte file, .svelte file, and we have three sections. So the first section is the JavaScript section with script tags, and the next one is styling, and the next one is the markup itself. So within .svelte file, you have three sections, and all these three sections, every component will have this, but it's not mandatory to have, of course, styles. And yeah, so this is a very simple example of a component in Svelte. And if you walk through it very quickly, we have div and span, and this class is changing the margin. We are adding the margin for this, and we have a count here. And if you go back to the previous slide, we can add props. If you have used something like React.js, we have the same terminology, props in React, and we are giving a prop here, and we are using that here. And if we need to use a prop, in Svelte we have to make it, we have to use export keyword. This is kind of a controversial selection. I think in one of the videos where Rich Harris talks about Svelte, he explained this much better. I will add all the resources for Svelte talks and the compiler resources, and you can see by yourself why these decisions were made. Yeah. And similar to React, Vue, and also Angular, we have child components, of course. So this is a child component, a very simple one, and we are importing it with the .svelte file extension. And this section, we move into dynamic attributes. Here we have an image, and we need to add the source to this image, and we can do it simply like this. And this is a dynamic attribute that we can apply. Props, we sort of looked into props earlier, but let's look at it again. As I mentioned, we need to use export keyword with Svelte components if we need to export it as a prop. And here we have count, and the default value is 1, and we use it here in the markup. Next, we import it from the parent component, and we use this child component, and when we are giving the props, it's similar to React.js. It's just given as an attribute in the component. Here we had count exported, so we use the same name, and we give the value there. And if a value is not given, this default value will be used. And we move into reactive assignments in Svelte. Let's move from the top to bottom. Here again we have a prop. This is the default value is 1, and we have something new, handle click function. It increments this count, and here in the markup again we have count, which is just showing the number of clicks there. And next we have the button. It then has this directive on click. So this handles the click event, and we can add the function that we created earlier here, and add it as add it as a parameter for the directive. And next we can look into reactive declarations. Yeah, this is reactive declaration. So for an example, let's say we have another variable called double. We need to get the doubled value of this count, and earlier we had only one value called count, and this is just a reactive assignment, and it will get changed automatically rather than us doing anything extra special. But in this case, we have to add this doubled value. And how do we add it? We do the same thing, but in this case, we have to use this $: sign in order to make it a reactive declaration. Otherwise, this value won't be changed, because we have to specify that this double value is a reactive declaration with this special notation $: And markup logic. This is similarly we have in React.js, we can use logic within JSX. Similarly, in Svelte, we have logic which can be used in the markup section with markup logic. So here we have $if and $else, not $else, $else. So this is just a if-else statement in markup. And if the count is greater than 10, we are showing this markup, and if it's else, if we are showing this particular section of this markup. Yeah. And bindings. This is a very simple example of a binding. Here we have an input, and we give the name here, and we show it in the markup. And when we do this assignment to this directive bind : value, it will be binded to this variable, and we can show it here, and it will be changed automatically. So that's a very simple example of a binding in Svelte. And similar to other frameworks and libraries, we have again lifecycle methods. On mount, on destroy, before update, after update, and tick. As the name suggests, they do the similar things similar to React or Angular. Yeah. I won't go deep into these concepts. And next also we have stores. With the time, I don't think I will be able to complete all the concepts in Svelte. But as I mentioned, what we need to get here is that this is just a compiler, and not just a framework or a library like React or Angular. Yeah, moving on. For state management, we have stores, and we have different types of stores in Svelte. So these are the types of stores: writable stores, readable stores, derived, custom, and auto subscription. With writable stores, you can write to this store, of course, and with readable, this is only a readable one. And with derived and custom, we can we can create different stores with by combining different other stores with writable or readable. And with auto subscription, as I can remember correctly, it's a pops up mechanism, if I'm not wrong. This is an example of a writable store in Svelte. The Svelte API gives the store, and the Svelte package gives the store, and we can import the writable API for writable stores. And this is an example of using this store. Here this is the store.js file, and in this case we are importing the store.js file as count. So this is a store.js, and this is where we use this store. We import it, and we try to increment this count using this update API. And this will get called when we click on this button. This is a simple example again. And with stores, we have unsubscribe API with writable stores, and also with other stores, if I can remember correctly. With unsubscribe API, the issue is that if you do not unsubscribe, there can be memory leaks when different components unmount. So as I showed earlier, there are different lifecycle hooks on mount, on destroy. So with on destroy, we can use this unsubscribe method, and unsubscribe this store when a component gets destroyed. To prevent memory leaks. Let's look into some performance comparisons with existing libraries or frameworks. I got an existing comparison from this repository. So this is comparing React and Svelte. This shows that the files that we get with React, and different bundles we get with React. And so the load time is so these are very similar applications, and the implementations are very similar. And if we take a look at the load time, this has taken 717 milliseconds. Of course, this can change under different circumstances, like the network or different caching mechanisms. This can change. And with Svelte, it has taken, in this case, it has taken 853. So in this case, it's higher than the React one. But and right now, I have seen that there can be certain optimizations in terms of this mechanisms. I can show it at after the presentation. And page load performance. This is again a similar comparison. Loading of JavaScript, and the rendering part, and also painting, and if the system was idle, the browser was idle. And again, we can see the time difference. Here in this case, Svelte has performed well compared to React. DOM manipulation, I have done a simple DOM manipulation in these applications, both in React and Svelte. And I think this was adding a to-do in the list, and for that this has taken this time, and Svelte has again outperformed, but not a very huge margin, but still it has outperformed React in that case. Some might argue that in real world production applications, this might not be the case, and that can be true, yes. But from this comparison, this is kind of the conclusion that I have derived. But and this is what I have seen from blog post, and these results were validated by Rich Harris. He's the creator of Svelte, and also Richard Feldman. Richard Feldman is a contributor to Elm language. If you had heard of Elm, that's a functional language which gets compiled to JavaScript, and they have validated these results. So I am kind of confident of these results provided by them. Yeah, so this is a graph which shows the performance between different UI libraries or frameworks, and the higher is better, and we can see that Elm has performed well. Yeah, and Svelte is just before React and Angular, and we also have the combination of React and Redux. Transfer size in kilobytes, fewer is better. Svelte has the least transfer size in kilobytes, and in this graph, fewer is better. So Svelte has performed well compared to what we use usually, like Angular and React. Here we have Angular, and here we have Angular, and here we have NGRX with Angular, and again we have Elm and Vue. Yeah. Number of lines of code. Fewer is better, of course, but this is again arguable. If it's just number of lines of code that we measure when it comes to code quality, that's kind of arguable. But if the number of lines are fewer, which means that we are doing the same thing with less number of lines, that can be used as an argument. If you use that as an argument, the number of if there are fewer lines of code, that's better. And we have Svelte with the list at the third place. I haven't used these two before Svelte, but if we take a look at Vue or Angular and React, they have a much number of lines of code compared to Svelte. Yeah, so these are a few of the references that we can use to get a better idea of Svelte and how it's different from these conventional and UI libraries or frameworks. And there's also a project called as Prepack. This is from Facebook, and this is doing a certain optimization at build time, and we have this link which answers is it different to Prepack? Is Svelte different to Prepack? And Rich has given an answer for that. You can take a look at that. And the Svelte website is svelte.dev. If you're using a Mac, sometimes this dev can be blocked, not blocked actually. You cannot move to dev websites. Just take a look at, just Google it and see how you can change that from macOS, because most people have complained that Svelte.dev website has been down for a number of occasions, but that's not the case. It's a configuration in the computer that they try to access Svelte.dev from. And next we have Sapper. If you have seen projects like Next.js for React and also Nuxt.js for Vue.js, this is a similar concept, Sapper. It's like a wrapper for Svelte.js with batteries included. So you get things like server-side rendering and many more things with Sapper. Take a look at that if you're interested in Svelte. This is similar to Next.js or Nuxt.js. And a real-world implementation. This is a clone of Medium. and this has implemented concepts in medium.com. And you can do the performance by yourself and take a look at the performance comparisons in Svelte. Yeah, so in this presentation, I think that's what I have already. But if I go to these resources, I mentioned about JIT and ahead of time compilation. If you're interested, just Google JIT versus ahead of time compilation in Angular, and you will see these articles. And they explained better than I have explained. You can see the difference between just in time and ahead of time compilation, and why they use ahead of time compilation at production when it comes to production. And they have Angular has their official documentation which explains ahead of time compilation, and this explains very well about ahead of time compilation. And this gives some kind of an overview of how there's a runtime overhead for both React and Angular. This article, I will share all of these articles when we release all the slides and the related resources. Yeah, so with Svelte, we do not have that runtime complexity. It's just pure JavaScript, HTML, and CSS rather than having a runtime which we need to use like React in React or Angular, and or even in Vue. Yeah, so that's what I have today for this presentation. If you have any questions, and if you have any questions, of course you can ask, and if I know the answers, I will of course give the answer. And if you miss anything, you can use this handle to find me anywhere and ask any question, even on Twitter. You can use this handle. Yeah, if you have any questions, we can discuss. And yeah, thanks.
Rajita, there was a question. Is Svelte stories using Redux store under the hood?
No, it has its own implementation. So if you go to Svelte, I think this was in the main repository rather than a separate repository. If I'm not wrong, but let me quickly check it. But from what I've seen, it's using its own implementation. I don't know whether they have moved, but
I think your screen sharing got paused, I think.
Okay. Okay, now I'm back. Yeah.
And there's another question that what is the thing that you are using in Slide to show the code snippets?
Oh, that's a pretty cool application. It's
Carbon,
hosted
right?
on Now. Carbon.
Yeah.
Carbon.now.sh. There are a few options you can use. It's a nice, pretty good application. The URL is carbon.now.sh.
There's another question. Is it similar to Vue.js, the syntax wise?
Syntax wise, I would say it's some kind of there's some kind of a similarity when we compare it to Vue.js. I haven't used Vue.js thoroughly though, but from what I have seen, Vue is also having the script, the JavaScript part, and the CSS part, and also the markup similar to what we have in Svelte.Svelte file, and also they have the extension called .vue. That's a similarity, but that's just an abstraction that all these frameworks or libraries give. But if you think about what's happening behind the scenes, as I mentioned earlier, that's what we need to think about when we move from one framework or library to another. What's really happening behind the scenes? Is there any importance of moving from what we use today to another framework or library? and what's actually happening behind the scenes, and what's the usage of moving to different frameworks. So the difference is it's a compiler, and but in terms of the abstractions that we use as developers, they can be pretty similar if you compare it to Vue. And also in Vue, there's a project called White. So this was created pretty recently. And the concept, yeah, so this is for HMR actually. So this is not directly related to the compilation
So make
process.
web dev fast again.
Yeah, White. In Vue.js, if you go to /white, there's this project. This is still an experimental project, and this is similar to Snowpack. There's a project called Snowpack, which uses native ES modules. So the competitor for this is actually the competitor for Webpack is Snowpack right now, and they use only ES modules. And what they do is they take the dependencies and create something called a folder called web modules, webs underscore modules. And from there, they import ES modules directly. And so there's no bundling process which is happening. So when you are developing, it's a pretty fast mechanism to do development. And there's no waiting time compared to Webpack. So earlier, in Webpack, it was like a huge waiting time, at least when we are using, when we do not use machines with high CPU power. It was taking much time to do these builds. But with Snowpack, their claim is that they're using ES modules, and the build time is not there anymore. To go back to the previous question, I think we have the store implementation here. If you go to runtime in Svelte, I think this is the store. Yeah, we have the update method. Yeah, so they have their own implementation. So this is not based on Redux. Do you have any other questions?
There's another question related to Snowpack. Can Snowpack integrated with Angular?
Okay. Yeah, it should be, because if you can use, if the browser is supporting native ES modules, that should be possible. But I haven't used this in any of the projects that I have created so far. This is just what I have seen. So from their claims, they can use, it can be used anywhere which can run native ES modules. Yeah.
How about Svelte community growth? Is from Gayan Prasanna.
I think it's about related to Svelte. He's asking about the Svelte community growth.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Okay, so community growth, yeah. So this guy, Rich Harris, he's working at New York Times, and many people have proposed him to get out of that work and do this as a full-time project, but it seems like he's refusing to do it. The reason that he's bringing up is that with Svelte, it is being used at New York Times, and it is being used at production, of course. So he's seeing different aspects and different angles of how people are using Svelte, and how he can take this project to different directions. So that was his idea, and that was his reason that he gave when people have asked why can't you move to full-time open source to make this Svelte project grow even bigger. So that's what has happened in Vue. Even he has moved to full-time open source, and he's leading Vue.js core team, and it has been a phenomenal growth compared to React, which is backed by Facebook, and also Angular, which is backed by Google. But Rich is taking a different approach here. It can be a positive, but time will always tell that. And if you think about other aspects like the contributors, we have a core team there, and there's a constant number of pull requests and also issues that have been raised for different aspects and concepts. Yeah. So in terms of the community growth, I have seen a positive community growth. It's not like it's been abandoned. And there has been many different new projects as well. So for an example, this is a new project, language tools, the language server for Svelte. If you're using, when you're using text editors and different IDs, we need to have a language server for different technologies for IntelliSense, for an example. So this is implementing the language server protocol for that. And I have personally used it with VS Code and also Vim. So this has worked quite well so far. Yeah. Any other questions, guys?
So Bhagya just added to the chat is that for state management and basics in Svelte, to have a look around with Richard's presentation on Svelte.
Yeah, okay.
I think you will be able to get a lot of motivation by looking at that presentation.
Yeah. Yeah, especially with this, I think this is the one, this rethinking reactivity. He explains most of the concepts quite well there. Why he came up with this idea and what was the requirement there in New York Times.
Okay, I think
Any more questions?
that's the end of set questions.
All right, great. Yeah, one more thing to add. If you're interested in the compilation process of Svelte, just search Svelte compilation, and you will see a talk from Svelte Society. There's a YouTube channel called Svelte Society, and also this guy, he's also a contributor to Svelte compiler. You will see his post. This is a post by this person who did the talk in Svelte Society, and this is a pretty good post which explains all the ideas of a compiler and how Svelte specifically has implemented different concepts in the compilation process and different types of optimizations that they're doing at the build time. Yeah, that's it from my side, guys. We can discuss new developments in JavaScript ecosystem.
Awesome. I think, Chadu, I think we have some more questions, not regarding to Svelte, but general questions.
Yeah, let's get it from top to bottom. I think it's in the chat.
Awesome.
So
I think the first question is, when it comes to state management in React applications, what is the best Redux or context API? What are the differences between these two? I think that's something we can talk a lot, right?
yeah, Bhagya raised the hand, so I have
Yeah.
unmuted him, so you can actually.
I know, I was just clapping. Thanks to Rajik. I think we should thank him for the presentation first before we move on to the other questions.
Yeah, we should. Because Rajika actually planned this session to do it in March. We actually planned a physical offline meetup. Yeah, it didn't happen because of the situation, so we had to postpone it. And glad we actually do it in online here.
And I think it's a very interesting topic what he discussed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we should just let people unmute themselves if they want to speak. Might be a nice way of going forward. so they can just put their answers by voice or either on chat. So I'm just curious, is there anyone who is already using Svelte?
I just allowed everyone to unmute themselves, so they can actually join if you unmute it.
Yeah. Rachika, have you used Svelte for any project that you have worked on so far?
For production, I haven't used, but for my blog, of course, I have used. I have ported it from, I think it's from React to Svelte. Yeah. Other than that, I haven't used it in any production applications so far.
Right. And in terms of like component reusability, I think Svelte is getting a bit of a blame for not allowing much reusability of components. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that is, I guess, depends on the requirements. It's kind of debatable actually when we compare it to React or Vue. There are some interesting discussions going on in the Svelte repository. You can go to Svelte.js and Svelte. I don't think I'll be able to find that particular issue. But it's true, it does not have this full-fledged ability of other libraries or frameworks like React or Vue. But yeah, so that's something to keep an eye on. And also the change of the APIs, because I think when it moved from Svelte 2 to 3 or 1 to 2, there was a significant change of APIs. So that's one thing that we need to keep an eye on. If you are
Is it
developing,
like Angular?
that's not not a similar huge change, but still there was a change, a significant change. Not like Angular. I think Angular is like a whole different monster compared to Angular.
I think many people learn from that.
Yeah, that's why I just asked that question. I really like the way that they actually constructing the component, that you can define the styles and you can define the UI component in separate and the script in a separate part, and then it's going to bundle into separate files.
Yeah,
I think that will be.
Yeah,
I think that will be an inspiration for other frameworks, maybe.
Yeah, maybe it got the inspiration from Vue.js. If I'm not wrong, it got it from Vue.js because Vue is very similar. We'll take a look at.
I think the Vue identifies itself as a compiler, right? It's more, it doesn't try to be a library or a framework. So I think that's the level Svelte is operating at.
Which means I think hopefully it will allow React or some kind of other libraries to be in top of that, using it is a compiler.
Yeah. Of course, we can have this concept of micro frontends side by side, having different different UI libraries side by side. And in the project that I am currently right now in 99X, we have implemented side by side micro frontend architecture. So of course that's possible, but still it's worked. Also, that should be possible because it just boils down to HTML, JavaScript, and CSS after it compiles from .12 files. Yeah.
I've also seen some companies like Apple posting career opportunities for people who has Svelte
Yeah,
experience. Yeah.
Apple and Spotify is also using Svelte, and also a few other big companies out there, which means that there's a potential for this idea. And the same idea is being used with stencil.js, if that's yeah, I think this also has some kind of a similar idea to this sort of a compiler. I'm not 100% sure. That's what I've heard. This is actually a component, something like a stencil, or I'm not quite sure, but a similar library with a library with a similar name. They are also using this similar idea of having a compiler rather than just a library and a runtime.
I think even the recent ML also like that one.
Okay, I haven't tried that.
It's also compiler.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And if you're
And
into ML, you can also look at a tool called Fastpack. That is quite faster. It's a quite fast JavaScript bundler. It is apparently like even multiple times faster than Parcel and Webpack.
okay. Was it Fastpack or? Yeah.
Yeah, Fastpack.js.
All right. I think this is written in OCaml. Yeah, OCaml.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has React preset and stuff.
And Elm, I have seen this a few years back, but I haven't tried it after like 2017. But from what they show us, it's quite exceptional compared to other UI libraries, and the performance is much better. And this is a functional programming language which compiles to JavaScript, and the compiler is written in Haskell. We can go to and one of the concerns that I have seen lately is that people have raised concern about the maintenance, because one guy is maintaining this project, and all the concepts and the ideas are coming from him. But Elm has quite a big community or ecosystem. But this event guy, he is maintaining most of the compiler core infrastructure. That's one of the concerns I have seen lately raised by the community. Yeah.
I
think we can get the existing questions and give the answers, and then move to any questions that you would like to discuss related to JavaScript.
Yeah.
We start with the question that what is the best for state management in React, Redux or context API, and differences between these two. I think you can start it.
Is the person who asked the question, is he on the chat?
Sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is Anushka Vijay Gunawardhan? Yeah. Anushka is in the stream still, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can now let the people ask questions, or just unmute yourself and put your thoughts forward for any question that is being asked. I think that would be a nicer way.
Yeah.
Getting more.
Yeah, let's go with the React state management there. So Redux,
Yeah.
context, or is there any other things?
Yeah,
What's your thought?
yeah. I'll put the groundwork, then you can continue. When it comes to state management, there's not only Redux and context API. First of all, there's the component state. And when it comes to state also, now these days there are two ways to use that, using class components and using functional components and hooks. I think most of the people still don't know about the hooks and their importance. I think we can create another question for that. When we then coming back to the state management, when we talk about the most the topmost state management tools, there's the component state, and then there's Redux, there's MobX, and there's a new guy called Easy or something, right? I can't remember the name.
ECPC.
ECP. Actually, when it comes to state, there are two things. The component state only manage the state of that component, but we are using Redux, MobX, and those stuff to manage the global state. So you can mix those stuff. If you only need that state, those information inside that component, there's no point putting it in Redux or something else. So that's the first point you have to remember. And then the second point is don't use Redux or context API or anything else if you don't really need it. So I think there's a famous blog post from Dan Abramov, the person who created Redux. He mentions that if you don't need it, no, don't use it. I think Rajik is trying to open that blog post.
So it's overreacted. So the post name is "You don't need Redux."
Yeah.
Okay, I think that was not in Overreacted. It was in Medium.
No, he actually migrated everything to Overreacted.
Okay.
Should be in below. I think he has a search in here.
Oh, okay.
That's
it's
fine.
also in Medium. You can. I think you can just search it from Google and it will come up.
Awesome. So
the thing is, you also put a tweet about it also, that first you need to think what kind of a state is that you need to access that kind of state in your multiple components in multiple containers, or just that thing is going to be in the same container. That's like if you have a drawer and there's a state to drawer close or drawer open. So does it need to be stored in your Redux store or the global store? So since it is kind of a thing that is related to that component only, you can actually store it in the as a normal state rather than going into the global state. And another example is like form status. Do you want to store the form status in your store?
Exactly. So with those questions, I think you can choose whether to use the component state or a global state like Redux or anything. I think
if you're going with hooks, Redux also now support hooks, and ECPC support hooks, and context API also support hooks. So you can actually go with any part, but make sure that you are very comfortable with what you're going to do. Exactly. If you know about Redux and if you are capable with handling that one with all the asynchronous processing and also, go with that one. But if you are not building a very large app, you can actually use ECPC or even the context API. For the context API, you can actually, there's a few blog posts from Ken Sidol, who's actually explaining how this providers works and how do you use the consumers and the use context hooks.
And I think there's another one called MobX State Tree. I think Bhagya know a lot about that.
Yeah, I can speak to it a bit. But just to revisit the question again, so the question was basically he was asking whether he should use context API or Redux. The way I would approach this one is whether it depends. It depends on what your requirement is or how big your application is, and how long you're going to maintain it, and questions like that. And it also depends if you're going to work in a team, because that can also make a big difference on depending on type of state management tools, or rather any tool that you're going to use. The way I would usually solve is that if you have quite the standard React developers, you would go with the context API. But if you're going to work in a more extended team with a large number of teammates, or if your application needs to be much more reliable, if you're using TypeScript, for example, you would need much more predictability in your state, and you would probably want to contain some type-related information in your state itself as well. So in that case, I would skip Redux and context API both and go with MobX state tree, because that solves most of the problems that there were before. And I think we also have Ruben here. Ruben spoke in January at our meetup. If I think it's the correct Ruben. And he had also come up with his own state management framework, which was very much similar to MobX state tree. The way MobX state tree works is by sort of representing the application like a tree in terms of its state. So think of it like similar to the virtual DOM, but just for state objects. I think that would be a very simple way of looking at it. I wouldn't go into much detail now, but it is something you can look at. First, you should understand the MobX, which is a state management tool, and then you should go and learn about the MobX state tree.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting, guys. I think we have time till 9:15. I think we need to go quickly if you're going to make it through all the questions.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I think we have to remind something else now. In the chat, Chatura Sampath has raised a small point. If you are using GraphQL and Apollo client, you can use Apollo for the state management. No need to add another state management library. So, yeah, being said that,
I bit hate the Apollo documentation.
me too. The main problem I'm having these days.
Yeah, they support local state management, and it is a little bit complex right now. But if you want optimistic UI, you can actually work around with update queries and adding queries. But apart from that, having your own things into local state management is doable, but it's kind of complex.
I think we have another question from Gayan. It's about Angular, I think, but I think it can be applied to many more projects. The question is not related to Svelte, but we've created an Angular project with a lot of modules. When modules grow, the build time increases and even needed to increase node memory maximum stack size. Is there a way to correctly modularize other than crashing the Webpack build time?
Interesting question. I think the way you would usually do is either by creating individual node modules for each of the components, if I'm to be corrected by Chatu or Pubudu.
Yeah. Chatu, do you have any?
So that's creating different packages for different components, or is that the case?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's how you would do it. Otherwise, you can use dynamic or lazy loading imports.
Yeah.
But in here, he's questioning that the build time is the one that he wants to optimize.
Yeah.
Which is a different concern rather than the runtime. library loading.
I think you can face that problem even in React, right? Rows.
I mean, I personally haven't experienced this kind of issue when I'm building applications. He's talking that the build time has been increased quite much. So if anyone wants to jump in and pitch in any of their ideas, you're welcome to do so. But the way I see it is that he has to break it into components that are built separately. Rajika, do you have anything to add?
I think that's the proper way to go ahead. Decomposing the like monolithic application to different separate packages like micro packages. Something similar to what we did in the backend from monolithic application to microservices. It's not the same idea, but the base idea is similar. Decomposing it to small packages. Yeah.
You can use either NX or Learner to make it like a monorepo and build incrementally.
I think
managing different packages in the same package.
I think we can do the next
Same
on Learner, right, Chatu?
Yeah, Learner gives you learner-related problems.
Yeah. Guys, we have only 1 minute. I think this call will be ended with after that, if I'm not wrong, Chatu. Are we still online?
Chatu? I think he's muted at the moment.
Yeah, okay.
It automatically.
Yeah, so if you disconnect, thank you guys for joining.
And
Do check out Svelte. Yeah.
And we should thank Rajika especially for the nice presentation on Svelte. I think it's going to be a really good initiative for everyone. And thanks should go to Bhagya Ayya for joining and sharing his knowledge, and for Chadu to host this event. I think time is up, right?
Yeah, I think the time is up. Yeah.
And I think the other questions, we can either take it on the next meetup, or you can post it in the group on Facebook. We can discuss it over there.
Yeah, of course.
I expect someone to either copy and paste those, or the posters themselves to post it.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I would like to thank Ben. It's actually from Australia time zone. It's like midnight when we started this event. He was there to host this event from Auth0. And thank you, Ben, for that one. And thank you all the participants who coming from Facebook Live and Zoom to participate in here. And thanks everyone who actually asked questions and keep the session going in very knowledgeable way. And yeah, we can actually move these questions to Facebook group and continue giving the answers in there. And hope our first session is kind of went really well. And I would like to thank Rajika again and making this possible with all this great content. And Bhagyaya, having you all the knowledge shared from Norway. I think it's kind of an evening for you.
Sweden, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Nordic region, yeah.
But yeah, okay. Then thank you and good night, everyone. And see you again in the next meetup.
Yeah, thank you guys, and good night, and stay safe.
Awesome. So good night, guys.